Okay, that's good. I can hear myself, so that means that we are good. So, my name is Denver Murray, and I am a forecaster for Virginia Weather Action and a consulting forecaster for NeoWeather. And we're going to be taking a look at the latest information on Hurricane Laura for local impacts down in the upper Texas coast and also across Louisiana, but also regional impacts for the Ohio Valley and the Mid-Atlantic, because this video is going to cover a couple of areas that we forecast for the Ohio River Valley, much of Ohio, West Virginia, but also the Mid-Atlantic and portions of the Northeast as well. So we will eventually get to your area, but we want to focus right now on the latest on Major Hurricane Hannah. It is Laura. It is a strong Category 4. The reason why I was thinking about Hannah is because it not so long ago happened up in Texas. So the latest advisory of Laura is 145 mile an hour winds, sustained winds right now. And if I can get this to move to the other graphic here, this is the updated information from the National Hurricane Center for storm surge. So if you look at this graphic, this is pretty impressive storm surge. This is life-threatening storm surge. This is storm surge. I can't remember the last time we've had storm surge forecast this high. So right here on the Texas-Louisiana line is where Port Arthur is. It's inland just a little bit, but storm surge will go as far inland as 30 miles inland, and it will likely reach the Interstate 10 corridor. So if you think about that, you know, Interstate 10 is pretty far inland, but we're talking about some pretty serious storm surge that will make it as far north as Interstate 10, and in some places exceed Interstate 10. So right now the forecast for Galveston Bay is for 2 to 4 feet of storm surge. If they get that type of storm surge, it's not really that bad. When we had Hurricane Hannah down in South Texas, the storm surge was a little bit higher. It impacted a good portion of South Texas. They had quite a bit of storm surge. It was probably more on the 4 to 6 foot range. So this is nothing unusual for landfall hurricanes to have that much storm surge. But when you get to the 4, 5, 6 feet area, that's when you start talking about some pretty good flooding. Then you start getting to 6 to 9 feet. 6 to 9 feet is something that you literally, especially 9 feet and above, you just cannot survive. So anyone on the coast, anyone that's going to try to live out the storm, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but it's just the Hurricane Center put out some really strong words today and this evening that these storm surge values, you're not going to be able to survive this. It's literally impossible. 15 to 20 foot storm surge on the east side, just to the east of the center of Laura. Once you get towards the New Orleans area, it's not really that bad. Actually, the storm surge watch that they had was canceled. They usually put storm surge warnings in effect for storm surge 3 to 4 feet or higher. So in the Lake Pontchartrain area, the storm surge is not going to really be that bad. But once you get to about Morgan City, Intercoastal City, and points west, that's where we're talking about storm surge values 6 feet and higher. And particularly along the coast, along the Texas-Louisiana border. And again, I'd say close to Port Arthur, Texas is a pretty good landmark because a lot of people know where that's at, and yes, it's a little bit inland, but we could very well likely have storm surge values even that area up to 15 feet. And just to the right of that area, we're looking at storm surge values up to 20 feet. And again, these storm surge values, this dangerous storm surge can extend northward up to 30 miles. there will still likely be even storm surge even further north than that, again to about the I-10 corridor. It won't be this high, but a good portion of the interstate could be flooded, not with just flash flooding, but also the storm surge as well. We're talking about rainfall totals just to the east of the center, locally a foot more. I could see local amounts up to 16 inches in some places. Luckily, the storm is going to be moving and it's not going to be stalling. This is not going to be like a Harvey situation that Houston had felt before. We're not going to have issues like that, but it's still going to bring a decent amount of rain in a short amount of time. So as far as impacts are concerned, we're talking about a 6 to 10 hour window. So that's the way that is looking right now. So if you are near the mouth of the Mississippi and points east, you're okay. If you are just to the west, southwest of Galveston, such as Freeport, I'd say you're okay as well. Houston is going to dodge a big bullet. New Orleans is going to dodge a big bullet because the storm for Houston is just going to be to the west. So you're just going to get some tropical storm winds and gusts. And New Orleans is likely not even going to get tropical storm gusts. So we've escaped damage, severe damage from two big cities, but unfortunately in the middle, and there's some pretty decent real estate here. I mean, we're not talking about many rural areas. Morgan City is a pretty big area as well, and then you're talking just north of there in central Louisiana, Lafayette. Some storm surge can definitely get up in that area as well. I think some of the storm surge forecast values there could get up to 6 to 7 feet too. So if you think about storm surge, 7 feet for Lafayette, 6 feet or so, that's pretty serious. That's pretty dangerous storm surge even for that area because they don't normally see that. So that's the type of system that we are dealing with. What I do want to show you is the latest infrared look at the hurricane. There is no wind shear. That is very minimum. The Gulf of Mexico waters are anywhere between 85 and 90 degrees. So it's allowed itself to do something that we call rapid strengthening. Some of the models were predicting a high category 4 a couple of days ago. Then they backed down a little bit. But we were thinking that it would be roughly about 140 as it came inland to upper Texas and portions of the Louisiana coast. So this is a look at the impacts. I'm going to show you actually the track, if I can find it. Give me 1 second here. So let's zoom in first. This is going to be the track. So we're looking at the hurricane lower making landfall right along the Texas-Louisiana state line, like literally. It's going to be very close. The best landmark I can give you is Port Arthur. Yes, it's a little bit inland, but that area is also going to see some major impacts. You will likely get hurricane force winds as well, and the very bad storm surge as well. But the extreme storm surge is just going to be to the right of the center. We're looking at landfall late this evening during the overnight hours. It's probably going to be more like 1 to 2 a.m., 3 a.m. local time when it makes landfall. And it's still forecasted to be a strong tropical storm as it moves into the northwestern portion of Louisiana by 1 p.m. tomorrow. It's still forecasted to be a tropical storm when it gets to Little Rock, central Arkansas, by 1 a.m. Friday. So in about 30 hours or so, it's still forecasted to be a tropical storm. You got to remember, it's going to be 155 when it makes landfall late tonight. So it's going to take time for the wind to die out. Then it's still going to remain a depression as it moves over the southeastern portion of Missouri. And then as we go into the Tennessee and portions of the Ohio River Valley, this is where some of the forecast is iffy. Some of the models at this point, it just depends on the strong ridge of high pressure to the southeast, but also we have a front. It's going to be interacting with a front to the north as that scoots to the south. So it really depends at this point exactly the track it takes once it gets to the Tennessee and Ohio River Valley. But regardless, there's going to likely be some really heavy rain around the center. Normally what happens with an inland tropical system once it loses its tropical characteristics, the rain moves from the east side to the north and west side. It will be interacting with a front as well. There'll be a lot of tropical moisture. Think of the front with tropical moisture like a sponge. You're wringing out the sponge and all that water comes out. So you're literally draining it all out. That's what Laura is going to do. A lot of tropical moisture with this. So we could still be looking at several inches of rain. This could still be flash flooding even into Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Indiana, portions of Ohio as well. Another good graphic to look at is the flash flood risk, the greatest flash flood risk. So through tonight into tomorrow, that pink purple area you see in the upper Texas, southwest Louisiana coast, that's high probability. The red is a medium. So that red covers a really large real estate, and the yellow is a slight risk. So as you can see, it goes all the way into central Kentucky, central and western Tennessee. And then as we go through Friday morning, this is a look at Friday morning. The moderate risk for flash flooding extends northward into Arkansas. And then as we go into the day 3 outlook, you got to remember it's going to be interacting with a front as we get to this point. There's now a slight risk for flash flooding across portions of the Ohio River Valley and going into Pennsylvania, northern Ohio as well. So this will be interacting with a front, and that helps to trigger even more rain. Again, it's like a sponge. It's just literally wringing out the sponge, all that moisture. So this is what the ensembles are looking like. This is what we call the spaghetti plots. And of course, it's really tight clustered as we get through Louisiana and much of Arkansas. And then once we get to day 3, this would be towards Saturday. They kind of spread out a little bit, but it brings most of the plots are mostly across Virginia. So roughly about, we'll say, 200 miles spread. The center could be anywhere near D.C., and it could be any further south than, we'll say, Roanoke to the Richmond area. That's probably more like 100 miles or so, but it could be even a little bit further south than that, 150-mile radius of where the center could be. Now, at that point, it will be losing its tropical characteristics. It's also interacting with a front, but there is still a heavy rain threat with us, and there is also a potential tornado threat. The wind field, as these systems turn non-tropical, also expand. Yes, the wind field, the winds weaken, but the wind field also expands. So when we look at the latest wind gust, and I'll show you the Ohio River Valley first, it doesn't really look like a lot because the winds are going to be on the eastern side of the system, mostly. So in Ohio, the Ohio River Valley, you're not really going to have a lot of wind. Maybe an occasional gust up to 35 miles an hour, no big deal up there. Once you get further south, though, as it interacts with the front itself and closer to the center, in the mountains of North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Southwest Virginia. This is where we're going to have some wind gusts, potentially up to 60 miles an hour. That would mainly be in the higher elevations of North Carolina and Tennessee. potentially higher wind gusts up to 50 miles an hour in the mountains of southwest Virginia, but I think on average it's going to range between 40 and 45. And then, as you can see, through Pennsylvania, Delmarva Peninsula, coming all the way down into North Carolina, we have these gusts anywhere from 40, 45, even some 50s, even down here in North Carolina. And there is the potential, there is a slight potential that once Laura does get back out into the Atlantic, could it become kind of tropical again? That's not impossible because the waters in the Atlantic are also warm too. It will still be interacting with a front, so it would probably be something that we call post-tropical, subtropical I should say, where it's not really actually a tropical system, but it's interacting with a front. So it would still be considered like subtropical Laura if it has winds of over 40 miles an hour. Once it gets out into the Atlantic, that's also a possibility too. Depending on the model that you look at for rainfall, because this is nowhere said and done, this would be the European model, and the European model, we're going to take this out through Sunday. So the heaviest rain will come in later Saturday through early Sunday. And on the European model, it does not paint a lot of rain in the mid-Atlantic. Where it does paint a decent amount of rain and where there could likely be some flash flooding is in the mountains of southwest Virginia, in the mountains of West Virginia, and in Kentucky. Once you get into the Ohio River Valley, because it's also interacting with a front as well, this is where we could have some values of 1 to 2 inches, maybe locally higher. But this is obviously where all the rain is going to be with Laura as it moves parallel to the Texas-Louisiana state line. And then once it gets into Arkansas, it starts to lose that tropical characteristics, and the rain will actually kind of shift from the east side to the north and west side. We see that happen a lot in these systems. So a good portion of Arkansas will likely see, unfortunately, some flash flooding, and then 2 to 4 inches locally, 6-inch amounts in far southern Illinois, western Kentucky, 2 to 4 inch amounts across central and eastern Kentucky. We were talking about Ohio as well. It will range anywhere, particularly the Ohio River Valley, I'd say at this point 1 to 3 inches, maybe a little bit higher the further south you go. And you can see through late Saturday into Sunday in the mountains of Tennessee, southwest Virginia, Kentucky, West Virginia, locally 2 to 4 inches. But the further east it gets, these models are not coming into any type of agreement at this time what is going to happen because it's a little too far out. So it really depends on the model you look at. This is the GFS model, and it doesn't show really extreme amounts. It just shows a more widespread, if you will, 1 to 3 inches, maybe locally higher amounts. As for a tornado threat, that threat would likely be in going through Arkansas, portions of northwest Mississippi, western Tennessee, and then eventually as we go during the day on Saturday, central Tennessee, portions of Kentucky, southwest Virginia will have a tornado threat as well. Southern Virginia, maybe central Virginia, and going into North Carolina. It's not an extreme tornado threat because it's also losing its tropical characteristics, but there will likely still be some strong storms that could produce the potential for some tornadoes. And I do want to show you this. This was the NAM model, and this probably gives a better indication. This goes through early Saturday morning, so from now through Saturday morning. This is a little underdone, believe it or not, along the Texas-Louisiana coast, where it's only showing wind gusts up to 111, there will likely just east of Port Arthur will be wind gusts much higher than that. But as we move northward, you can see Lafayette ends up getting hurricane wind gusts. And these hurricane wind gusts go almost up into northwest Louisiana. And then as you go into Arkansas, strong tropical storm winds and gusts up to 60, maybe 65 miles an hour. And then you can see the wind field as it expands. Even central and northern Alabama up to 45 miles an hour. A good portion of Mississippi 40, 45, maybe cracking 50, and a good portion of Tennessee up to 50 miles an hour. Now that model only goes out to 60 hours, but if we were to expand this a little bit more, you can see where the 35 to 50 mile an hour gusts continue eastward on its track. But again, once you get to, we'll say, Friday night, Saturday, it's not written in stone yet where the center is going to end up going. This is the rainfall forecast for the next 3 days from the Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center. And this is a pretty good idea to tell you how much rain is to be expected. They basically blend in a lot of the models. So the lighter green is 1 to 2 inches, the darker green is 2 to 4 inches. Then you get into those oranges, that's where you have locally 10 inches of rain. And then that red, literally near the Port Arthur area, that's rainfall amounts up to 16 inches, 15, 16 inches, isolated amounts. So Laura, unfortunately, is going to cover a really huge real estate from far east Texas, much of Louisiana, Arkansas, and then Tennessee Valley, portions of the Ohio River Valley, and then the Mid-Atlantic. It cuts off Virginia because we had to wait a couple more model runs to find out exactly how much rain we're going to get in the Mid-Atlantic. But interacting with the front for the Ohio River Valley, I would think at this point 1 to 3 inches with locally 4-inch amounts, and that would also include the Tennessee River Valley as well. So for those of you that are just joining, if you had family or friends that wanted to ride out the storm, I really hope that they change their mind, because time has definitely run out, because the outer bands have already reached this area. There has already been reports of flooding. The strong storm surge is already making it in along the coast, and it will continue to spread northward over time tonight into tomorrow morning. So we're talking about storm surge values potentially as high as 20 feet along the southwest Louisiana coast in some of these bayous. So it does not look good at all. Unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of damage in this area. Port Arthur is likely going to get a lot of damage as well. They're not likely going to get the highest storm surge, but they are still likely going to get storm surge, I'd say roughly in an estimate about 12 feet, which is extreme, but let's be honest, it's better than 20. But still, once you get above 9-10 feet, it's going to look like a really horrible picture, regardless if it's 9 to 10 feet or 20 feet. Again, once you get to 9 to 10 feet, it just paints a horrible picture. So we are luckily not impacting millions and millions of people, because Houston roughly has about 5 million people, and there's a couple million people in New Orleans as well. So the center of Laura is going to be just to the east of Houston, and the center of Laura is going to be well west of New Orleans. So that is good news, but unfortunately it's bad news for Morgan City and some of these other places all the way west to Port Arthur, Texas. It's not painting a good picture at all for these areas. And again, this is the forecast from the Hurricane Center. The tropical storm force winds extend outward to about roughly 200 to 210 miles from the center, and the hurricane conditions extend outward, I believe 60 miles was the last update from the center, outward to 60 miles. And again, tropical storm force winds about 200 to 210 miles from the center. That M means a major hurricane, which is category 3 and plus, and it is forecasted to be 150 miles an hour as it makes landfall very, very close to the Port Arthur area. Again, it's a little inland, but most people know where Port Arthur is. And just to the east of there is where the really dangerous, life-threatening storm surge is. So unfortunately, those people that are there, it's not looking like a good scenario. Again, once you get the storm surge above 9 feet, you cannot survive that. So this is nothing that we're going to sugarcoat. The emergency officials have tried everything, even with COVID-19, to get everybody out. Taxi services were providing free shuttle services. There were bus shuttles from local cities and towns. So you can't say that they didn't try to get you out. There was a way and a willing way to get everybody out. All you had to do was say that I needed to get out and help. And there was also help for pets. A lot of the shelters welcomed pets as well, and they were also helping the elderly and the disability. So there was every way, shape, and form to get these people out. I've been watching all the news stations down there, and they have done a fantastic job. So the bottom line is, if you are down there, do not call 911 if something happens, because they will not come out and risk their life to save you. And that's just the way it is. You put your life on danger, unfortunately, and what ends up happening is emergency officials come out and they risk their life, possibly death, because people didn't want to leave. So again, one last time, this is the storm surge. We'll look at the storm surge, and this is the latest again on Laura. Packing 145 mile an hour winds. I did talk a little bit, a few things about some of the other hurricanes. So going back and looking at some of the other tracks, such as Katrina kind of did a path like this, and along the Mississippi and Alabama coast there was a ton of storm surge. But going back and looking at the records, I don't think it reached 20 feet. I don't think it was that high. And then one earlier this season with Hannah was down here in South Texas, but they still had storm surge values up to 6 feet along the Texas coast. So 6 foot storm surge is nothing to play with. Again, once you get to 6 foot, it's survivable, but once you start to get to 9, 10, 11, 12, it's just not. Unless you are extremely higher up, it would be really the only way you could possibly survive that. So that's the update that I have on this. For anybody down there that's covering the storm, I'm hoping that the news media stations that are down there evacuated as well. I know they have a storm to cover, but you don't need to be on the eastern eye wall of this, the front east quadrant that we talk about, because that's just unfortunately very dangerous to even be there, especially in these type of conditions. Going back to, talking about other hurricanes, Andrew would be another example in what we saw. It was a smaller hurricane that came into South Florida. The news stations were there, and it is true that a lot of these structures down here can withhold Category 3 hurricane winds. But we're talking about a hurricane that's pretty close to a borderline 5. 157 plus, and in the advisories they go by 5-mile-an-hour increments, so it would be 160 for a Cat 5, and this is expected to be 150. So we're only talking about a 10-mile difference. It's a high-end Cat 4. There's going to be a lot of structural damage, and I just want you to be prepared, unfortunately, in this area for when you start to see the photos and the videos. It is unfortunately going to be devastating, because it looks like it's still strengthening, and it still has about roughly 100 or so miles before it comes inland. So it's still strengthening, and it still has time to reach 150 to 155, and then you also have those gusts that could possibly, unfortunately, be a little bit higher than that. So I'm going to get off my soapbox about people being down there, and also storm chasers. I know that you have a job to do, but you still don't want to be down there. You just don't. It's not worth money and taking that perfect photo and risking your life, and unfortunately the police having to come to your wife and your children to tell you, that they died. It's just not a risk to take. I don't care who you are, a professional storm chaser or not. I just don't care. But again, I'm getting off my soapbox about that. So everybody in the storm path, please stay safe. We will continue to have updates tonight into tomorrow. Please be safe out there, regardless of wherever you are on this track. Louisiana, Arkansas again. Much of Arkansas is going to get strong tropical storm winds and gusts. Even the far southeastern portion of Missouri, and then Tennessee Valley, Ohio River Valley, there'll be a flash flood threat as we go late Friday into Saturday, and Saturday into Sunday across the Mid-Atlantic. So stay safe, everybody. We will have another update throughout tonight in the overnight hours, and then tomorrow until this storm finally exits the U.S.